that, I want to just say welcome again to everyone here. This is the new Supervisors Community of Practice virtual networking event. So the purpose today for us to get together here virtually is to talk about a specific topic that's relevant to you folks who are either new to supervising or have been in management for a little while. And today's topic of conversation is time management, how to get everything, let's say most things done. This topic comes up a few times a year, and it's always a very full discussion and conversation, so I'm excited to get into it today. Before we get started, though, just a couple of things to remember. As folks are doing now, please utilize the chat. We'll keep an eye on it as we're talking to address questions that come up if we can, but it's a good place to connect with other folks that are on this call with us today. So definitely use the chat. And just a reminder that we do have sort of a supplementary LinkedIn group for the new supervisors of community practice. So if you haven't joined that yet, that's also another good place to connect with your colleagues, ask questions, and get more resources. So remember to join that. So we have two speakers today, which means we're going to have a really good conversation here. I'm joined by Ray McCollum, who's our DACS Policy Chief at the National Science Foundation, and Kate Vendimio, our workplace feedback guru, trainer, speaker, instructional designer, and consultant for small businesses and associations. Really excited to have you both here today. So let's get right into it. Our first question is, this is a really broad topic, so let's start at the top here. How do you each sort of define effective time management? How can you kind of define that for us to kind of put some constraints around the conversation today? And Ray, I'll start with you if you're ready.
Sure. So I think, how do I know if I'm effectively managing my time? I think that certainly points to sort of the work that I have on my to-do list, and if any of it's getting done. I think part of time management is just making sure that the time that you have available to work on those projects or assignments that you have, that you're using that time wisely, effectively, to finish what that project. But I think part of the issue, though, is our days as supervisors, they're all over the place sometimes, and so you kind of hope that when you build a to-do list at the beginning of the day, and you've identified things that you want to get done, that you can actually work on those things. But just from my experience with how a supervisor works from in a government perspective, I know we love our meetings, and we have meetings to have meetings. And so sometimes that may slow us down in sort of the progress we want to make on our to-do list. So I think if I know how do I know that I effectively manage my time, is that by the end of the week, so I won't say from a daily perspective, but by the end of the week, I've completed the tasks that I wanted to complete, and I started some of the tasks that I wanted to complete as well.
Yeah, I like that. And I'm certain we will come back to meetings because that always comes up when we're talking about time management. So, and Kate, how do you define time management for yourself?
Yeah, so I think time management is really about focusing on making sure that your priorities are completed. And so I think priorities are different than tasks. And when we get, or when, me personally, and I think many of us, when we get busy, we have a tendency to be able to measure our completion by how many tasks we can check off the list. But time management, especially when you are a supervisor, is beyond just, checking things off on a list. It's more of thinking strategically, thinking a little bit more high level, spending time to allocate, to be there to support your staff, to be able to think through things in a critical way. And so I think a lot of it is sort of shifting your paradigm when you're moving into that supervisor role of, it's not just task, it's making sure that I'm prioritizing things. So in any given moment, it might mean that the priority has to shift to dealing with an immediate situation with one of my team members. And then it goes back to completing that report. So I agree with what Ray said, is I have a tendency to look at things in broader blocks of time. So it might be what I can complete in a week, how I can feel accomplished. But how do you know if you're effectively managing your time is, I think, a slightly different way to look at it is I originally wrote down, I don't feel overwhelmed, but then I realized that that's just part of life in general. And so it's when I can see the needle moving in the direction that it should be moving in. So when I can see progress occurring, again, from developing my staff's team, my team's skills, and then also being able to accomplish what's on my list, and maybe having a little bit of time to grab lunch in the process is what I would say is a successful management of my time.
Yeah, I agreed. And yeah, I like what you're saying about completing tasks versus getting broader things done. And I think that sort of begs the question around the difference between productivity and busyness. That's something I think of a lot. Just because I'm busy doesn't necessarily mean I'm being productive. So in the age of hybrid work, which we are still definitely in, Kate, you mentioned shifting priorities and things like that. And I think that's become more of a hot topic with hybrid work because we're not all in the same place, and the start of the day, end of the day, those lines are blurred a little bit. So do you both have tips around creating effective boundaries so that you're not, again, pushing the productivity so far that you're burnt out? And Kate or Ray, whoever wants to get started.
I started last time, so go ahead, Kate.
Okay. So creating effective boundaries, I gotta say it's been one of the most difficult things. I work from home 100%, and my office is across from my bedroom. So it can be very, very difficult to draw boundaries. One of the things that I have found, I'm a big fan of blocking time on my calendar, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later, but I've built in personal boundaries. And I even go so far as to color code my meetings and whatnot, which, for some people that's too extreme, but anything on my calendar that's yellow means that it's something personal. And so I have, times to work out in the morning. And then I have a specific time blocked off. I have a hard stop. Most days I pick up my kids at 3:30. And so I have a very definitive stop at that point. And that's when I try and shift my priorities. I do then generally log back on in the evenings because that's just the nature of my work. And that's where I spend more of my time. And again, we'll talk a little bit later about where your time strengths are, what time of day. That's when I get a lot of my strategic thinking done, is at night, because I'm more of a night owl. So what's an effective boundary for me doesn't mean that that's effective for other people, but that's just kind of how it works for me. But I will say one of the biggest tricks I learned is if you're using either Gmail or Microsoft Outlook, that ability to craft emails, but then not have them be sent out until a later time, I think has been a wonderful trick that I use regularly, knowing that just because I am a late night person and I'm a night owl and that's when I do my best thinking does not mean that I have expectations that everyone else on my team does that. So very often I will craft emails at night and then have it set out to then be sent out the next morning.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I think the biggest themes that I heard from Kate is being organized. And I think that word organized is different for everyone. But I think, being organized is the way that you can sort of create sort of effective boundaries. The one thing I would also add to what Kate said about blocking time in your calendar, like I do that all the time, mainly because of the meetings I'm in. So I think it is important to block time, whether it's to eat or anything like that. But I think also from a manager standpoint, I try to, push my employees to identify the time that they're going to be working daily, and then sort of sticking to that. Obviously, for the government, we should be working 40 hours a week, and from a manager standpoint, that's the sort of, some of those rules should still apply. Obviously, there's going to be times where you're going to have to work a little bit more hours, but sticking with that work-life balance as much as you can will be, very helpful to, maintaining the sanity for your life, for as you are a supervisor. I think the other part of it is, as a supervisor, one of the things I try to also create is making sure that when I have meetings, that they have agendas. Because that is also going to save you time as well. So going into meetings where there's no agenda, you can understand that those meetings end up being an hour and you're like, where did time go? We didn't even get whatever we wanted to get solved. We didn't get it solved. So figuring out ways that you're sticking to these time barriers that you're putting in so that, you are working effectively. And I think finally, I would say, just from a standpoint of just being able to work efficiently and working across sort of, working with other supervisors as maybe meeting internally, having an internal sort of working group for supervisors where you can talk about things, ways that you're being efficient. I think similar to this forum, doing that internally, I think because, one of the things is that every agency is different in how the different things that they work on and sort of the different ways that they are managing their workforce. And so I think, help by working with people that are also in similar situations within your agencies and creating those meetings where you can talk about what it is that you do so you can work efficiently, or maybe you find out something new or something that you didn't know was even an option as a manager. It will certainly help you be effective, especially when it comes to hybrid work. That will certainly help you be effective as well as not burning out. So.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of what Ray was saying is, I actually had a meeting today with someone in a federal agency, and we were trying to schedule something, and he said, well, my team schedules all meetings for 50 minutes now, so 50 minutes rather than 60. And I thought, what a great best practice. And I think what we're finding is when we are working from home, going from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting is even more challenging than when we're in person, because at least when you're in person, you can generally get up, walk and get some coffee, talk to somebody. You're moving to another meeting space. You can say, let's have a walking meeting, right? There's ways to sort of break up things and do what we call maybe healthier opportunities to meet. But when you are in that virtual sense and you are just sitting in front of a computer, there is the thing, Zoom fatigue is real. And I just thought that was a really great norm that his team has created, is that they try and do 50 minutes. The other thing that I try and do with my staff is I am very, very willing to push back of saying, does this really warrant a full hour meeting, or is this something that we can get done efficiently in 30 minutes or even 20 minutes? So I don't hesitate to say, I'm more than happy to talk to you. Let's put some time on the calendar. I want you to really think, is this going to take a full hour? And some people, especially some of my team members that are completely remote, sometimes they need some of that extra time to have that interactivity, right? Like we need to build in, there are some team members that I know what would be a 15-minute meeting will turn into a 45-minute meeting because we need to spend a little bit of time talking and renorming things, because they might be working exclusively at home and don't have that opportunity. So, it depends on how big your team is. Sometimes if you've got a smaller team, you have a little bit more flexibility to think about, how long do we have these meetings? How frequently are we meeting? And you can push back a little bit. When you have lots and lots of team members, sometimes those norms are much more difficult to establish.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's good to think about. And Emily just put in a question here too. It's something I was thinking about. How do you create boundaries when others don't respect them? Because that is something that comes up a lot on these networking events, honestly, is a lot of us know the tactics at this point, or know of the tactics that we can use, but then in practice, it becomes really difficult to stick to it. But again, since this is usually a group of supervisors, managers, folks in leadership, we sort of have to model that behavior, right? If we want our teams and our direct reports to also be able to create their own boundaries. So any comments on sort of holding yourself accountable for these time blocks and these tactics that we're using so that our team can also see that we mean it and then feel like they have the space to do that themselves?
Sure. I think, and that's a great question. I think, well, if someone doesn't want to respect your boundaries, I think someone put phone bad. I mean, yes, you could hit them with a phone bad if you found them, but I think, but from a standpoint of finding ways for people to hold people to sort of the boundaries you created, there's going to be times where there's where you're going to have to do something that's outside of the blocks that you may have built, and that's fine. But making sure that you are sticking as much as you can to it will actually create a culture that people will follow from a standpoint of people who are sending you messages or just other people on your team. And that's where you start to see more people doing something that has worked. I think part of understanding how to be a manager is understanding when you were a subordinate or when you were an employee, what worked best for you. What were you okay with? What helped you with with if you could tell your manager what was a good thing, what were those things, and what were the bad things? So certainly working from that is very helpful. And sorry, I feel like I just lost the question, but I think I'm fine still. But creating those boundaries when they're created and people are not respecting them, I think it's all up to how disciplined you are with those boundaries. And I'm coming from the Army. I used to be in the Army for 10 years, and so that discipline there of maintaining the things that I've created I figure out and how to focus on making sure I maintain those boundaries I've created. So that's kind of how I work through those things, and I'll just pass that on to Kate.
So I'm a big fan of boundaries. And that's taken me a long time to feel comfortable setting boundaries. But I realize that I have to be the one to model that. So I think there was a question in the chat about like, what if someone emails me over the weekend and it's not something urgent? I think that's something that as a manager, you need to have that conversation with your team and set those norms and expectations. It's different if it is someone above you who is asking for things. That's a slightly different answer, right, on how you manage those boundaries. But if it's within your team, I think it's completely appropriate to make it very clear that these are the expectations. I made it clear to my team, I got little kids, we're very busy. There's some times where I won't get to your email until late at night and I craft it and then it'll go out the next morning. If it's something urgent and you want to text me, then we can do that. There's different ways that I try and handle it, but I think you need to have those regular conversations. If I'm a big fan of setting those boundaries, and I know that I get really anxious and really worked up if I feel like people are consistently not respecting those boundaries. And so conversely, I try to be very transparent and say to people, listen, I recognize that I might be reaching out to you outside of your normal working hours, but this is a very urgent message. Or, just trying to be very transparent and saying to them, like, I'm trying to respect your boundaries too. Here's a reason why I might have just stepped over the line and giving an explanation behind it. So I think a lot of transparency is just really where it comes down to.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it sounds like too, I'm hearing transparency and communication and asking for clarity. So even the question for Megan that Kate, you addressed of like, what should I do? That is a good point to have. If you don't know what to do, right, that should be kind of a trigger for having that conversation so that you do know what to do next time that comes up. And hopefully you have that kind of relationship with your manager and your team where you can have that, clearly. But so shifting gears for a second here, our next question is about time sucks. So this is, the hard part about time management, figuring out the things that are really draining your day or maybe are sort of inefficient during the day. So Ray, anything you can think of, like any little tactics that might be helpful for finding these little kind of pain points throughout your day that really might be derailing your overall time management?
That's a very good question. I think one of the things that helped me is that I schedule everything on my calendar just so I can make sure I am streamlining my day, making sure I'm getting things done. And then, I also just know when I have availability too. Because there's always those folks who are stalking your calendar and they find any little open spot and they just it'd be 30 minutes that you want to do lunch. Now throw that little 30-minute meeting in there. It's like, yeah, you don't think I want to eat. So, so I think, managing that. I mean, I'm not saying to block your entire calendar, not at all means, but I think just making sure that, the things that you need to get done, finding ways to make sure you're getting those done. For me, it's just putting things in my calendar that locks time in for certain things that I want to make sure I accomplish that day.
Yeah, it sounds like organization is a huge component of effective time management. That keeps coming up today. Kate, anything you can think of that, really drains your day?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, when you're a supervisor, a few issues can come up and suddenly your entire day or week is derailed, right? I think a lot of it is making sure that you remove yourself from unnecessary drama. Things can get stressful, people can get frustrated with each other, and then you get the either metaphorical or literal, like, can I just talk to you for a few minutes? And then they shut the door, and then all of a sudden you turn into the person that everyone's coming to, so it's a lot of making sure you're empowering your team to be able to solve some of their own problems. So I find, of course, there's going to be conflict, and of course, there's going to be times where you really need to coach your team through things. But on the flip side, enabling people to work through some of those problems before they elevate it to you can help take away some of that drama, which can be very emotionally and sometimes very physically taxing. Another thing that I really like and I follow a lot is what's known as the Eisenhower Matrix. Or if anyone's ever taken any or read the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and it's a matrix where it's got 4 quadrants, and it helps you prioritize things that are urgent and things that are important. And it's a really interesting framework of, there might be things that are what you consider urgent, but other people don't consider urgent, or vice versa. And so it's a really good way. And I can find that when I get really overwhelmed, sometimes sitting and actually putting things, my to-do list on, or doing a retroactive and saying, well, how did I just spend my last week? Because I got nothing done. I go back and I look at it and I put it into those quadrants, and you can start to realize pretty quickly that a lot of times I find is something that other people consider urgent, but is not necessarily important, is what takes up a lot of my time. And so trying to find some trends and mitigate those risks up front. And like I said, a lot of it comes down to the interpersonal conflict that your team members have, and really trying to work with them to empower them to resolve some of those issues between themselves before it gets elevated.
And if I can jump into that too, so there's a key point Kate there made, also, at least to me, enabling and empowering your team. And I think, there's long-term benefits to that. If you're allowing them to make these sort of decisions and going forward, one, they can learn from those the decisions, and they can build on, that personal development there of learning how to handle certain situations. Because essentially what our job is as supervisors, in addition to, the work that we're getting, is to build the next set of leaders to take over different parts of the government, or outside. And so part of that is putting them in these situations where they can learn from those situations and build on those situations, and finding better ways and better solutions for solving problems. And so that's where you also have, people just the thing about our experiences is that we can use them in so many different areas and ways that we don't know until we've actually been a part of those experiences. So I think that part of enabling and empowering is such a big one.
Yeah, that sounds like learn by doing, right? Well, for the sake of time, we'll move kind of quickly through this next few questions, but I'm sure that people are curious for each of you. Do you have sort of go-to time management tactics or skills that you like? One I can think of is the Pomodoro method. I'm not sure how many people have used that before. It's kind of just a 25-minute time blocker. So it's short bursts of things, but you're focusing on just one thing at a time. And I think 25 minutes is like an ideal time frame. So you're not getting distracted or sort of burnt out on one thing before you're done. Kate, anything from you?
I think just real quick, two things is one is know yourself and know when you work really well. Some people work really well and think really well first thing in the morning. Some people don't get their energy till they've had several types of, cups of coffee. Others do well at night. So I think for me, that has been very critical. The other thing is, as I move into thinking more about, moving into more strategic thinking that's required for my job, blocking time on my calendar, even if it's for an hour on Monday and then an hour on Friday, and it's just listed as thinking. And you can label it whatever you want, and if you want to make it a code or whatnot, but to like covet that time. It's a great way to start your week where you're really trying to prioritize things. And then it's a great way to end it as well.
I like that. Just thinking time.
Yeah. And so I do agree with blocking time. That's my thing as well. But I think also if you can, I try to have maybe consistent meetings with folks so that that certainly helps you get ahead of any sort of issues that may come, or you're just aware of something, and you can just be talking about things early on before they become a problem. Especially when you are, if you have a large group and you have the same consistent issues, making sure you're able to identify those issues and then having a meeting to really talk about that issue and how you can, what's some potential solutions, and having some of that collaboration, because I think a lot of these things that sort of issues that we have, we're not the only ones having them. So setting those meetings up for people to have those conversations, I try to do that because I'm trying to minimize the individual time I have to do each time that problem comes up. So
I like that. Our next question here is, how should you best communicate with your team about your day to improve your time management? So again, from like a supervisory perspective, I think this is getting back to communicating maybe what priorities are, but what are some things you think you should focus on as a supervisor or manager when you're talking to your team about time management? You can let that stew for a second.
I'll just jump in really quick. I think one of the biggest challenges, especially when we're in a hybrid work environment, is you want to be the approachable manager with the open door policy, but then you've also got things to do, right? And so you've got people to manage, you've got goals to meet, and it can be really challenging. And so I try and set parameters, and I'll be honest, it's hard. It's really hard. But, I am, depending if you use, Microsoft Teams or Google Chat or whatever you do, but, you just mark yourself unavailable for certain times. Like when I have my thinking time, it's just unavailable. That's just a boundary that I've drawn. And then there's other times where it's like, okay, if I'm green, like I'm available, you can pop in, you can virtually pop in and do whatever you need to do to reach out to me. So again, trying to set those expectations up front that I am trying to make myself as available as I can. However, I also need to draw some boundaries, just like all of you should be doing too.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think that word parameters is drawing those boundaries and parameters is going to be very important. I think one of the things I try to do too, it's more of a philosophy, if anything, is that I try not to respond to something in 2 seconds. As soon as I get that email, not responding right away. I think sometimes we get caught up in responding to emails, and that takes a lot of our time. And for me, I think there's sometimes things will solve themselves because maybe that person who sent that question originally had some time to think about the question before that they were just posing to a supervisor, to myself, so that now they're like, you know what, I know the answer. So what do you think about this answer? So that's part of empowering them there too, where they can come up with their sort of answer to you in the question, rather than always having to be the one to answer the question and having to think through and find all the regs and everything else for it. So I think some of that is helpful for improving sort of the time management, because you're allowing them sort of some time to think it through.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think that ends up setting the tone for your team too, that you don't need this instant response. Like, that's not the baseline for everyone. Everyone is allowed to take their time and breathe and answer. So I like that one a lot. And then our final question here is, how do you make sure you're meeting the needs of your team without working all hours of day and night? And I think, Kate, you've been touching on this throughout the discussion here. Like, it is really hard to balance your own work and then supporting your team. So any sort of final words on buttoning that part of the conversation up?
So I think, we've said a couple different things about that. And so, my one thought on that is kind of beyond time management, but as a supervisor, I think it's important to be an advocate for my team. So there are times, just based on the nature of our work, where we all have to pitch in and work a little bit more. But if it gets to the point where my team is burning out and we are consistently being overworked, let's be honest, a lot of positions still need to be filled. We're oftentimes doing the roles of multiple people. I think it's our responsibility as supervisors to come up with ways to help our teams cope with that, working smarter and not harder, maybe going to bat and saying to your peers or at team meetings, like, this is too much. Let's reset some boundaries and expectations among work allocation. Can this be put off a little bit longer? Can you help me bring in some additional resources? And so, not necessarily an answer directly on time management, but I think it's more of what our role is as a supervisor is we do everything we can to advocate for our team. When it comes to the point where your team is still all working all hours of the day and night, and that wasn't part of the original job description, then, start asking your team for solutions. Come up with some different ways that you can all manage this workload together. There's a big difference between surge of work based on the nature or the time of the year, and then the consistent, regular working way too much. And that's when you've got to really honestly look at what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Yeah, and I'll just say quickly, I think the advocacy one is very big. I think what you want to try to make sure that you do is keep your employees happy. So if you keep your employees happy, they're going to, keep you happy, because they're going to be productive. I'm not saying, give them everything that they ask for, but certainly letting them know sort of that you're going to bat for them, that you're working on getting whatever it is, resources that they need to be successful, or whatever that is that you're working for them. So communicating that too is important as well, so that they know that they're not, doing this work alone by themselves. And like that they feel that, you don't want that employee to become disgruntled, because then guess what? That's going to be more of your time that you have to then figure out that's going to be thrown in and messing up your entire schedule. So I'll end with that.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much. And thanks to everyone on the call for sticking with us. I know we are a bit over time. But again, this is a topic we touch on a lot, so we will be sure to come back to it, at some other points in the year. And Darlene, I want you to know we see your question about procrastinating. This is something everyone can relate to. I'll pull some resources. We do have GovLoop resources on that specific topic that we can put in the follow-up email. So I see your question. But what's next? We have another virtual networking discussion in June, at the end of June, about how to set team goals, which should be a really great conversation. And if you're ever interested in joining us as a speaker on one of these virtual networking events, please reach out to us. We love to hear from everyone, different voices and perspectives. So don't hesitate if you're kind of interested in that. But again, Kate, Ray, thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and all your insight. So thanks again.
Thank you for having me.